I couldn't get out of my pocket either, so testing. How's that? Very good. Thank you. Maybe you start the recording there. All right. Start the recording after this. Red team. Red team, let's meet right after. Right up here for just a minute.
Yeah, right here.
Red team right here for just a minute when we're finished. Proverbs 11:14. For lack of guidance, a nation falls, but many advisors make victory sure. The idea of modeling is living your life for someone else to follow. They can model their life after yours. Or you follow someone else who's living a good life and you model your life after theirs. If you have someone who is providing guidance to a nation, but they do not provide good guidance, that nation can fall. You can overspend and go broke. You can get into wars that you can't win. Foolish leaders lead their nations to awful destruction. On the other hand, if you have many advisors, you have a better chance of victory because you have a number of people you're modeling, and when somebody's making a mistake and you have other models that you follow, they might point out, yeah, we would suggest something besides that. And you have a number of models or advisors that can help steer you in a good way. Another idea is Proverbs 28 and verse 10. Proverbs 28:10. He who leads the upright along an evil path will fall into his own trap, but the blameless will receive an inheritance. If you lead the upright to a wrong path, there you have someone. This got turned the wrong way, my friend. Even the righteous, if they are not using good judgment, can follow someone who will take them in a bad way. And they can find destruction. Or you can find someone who doesn't know how to use microphones. Try that right there. How's that? All right. He who leads the upright along an evil path will fall into his own trap, but the blameless will receive a good inheritance. This section, Proverbs 27 and 28, the last part of 27, then chapter 28 and 29, are called the royal Proverbs because they are pretty much about leadership. The righteous leader versus the unrighteous leader, and some advice and instruction on providing proper leadership. They're called the royal Psalms, or Proverbs rather, because it's believed these Proverbs were written to train young men to serve in the king's court. The king would want young men who were loyal to him, who also had integrity, who were dedicated to the kingdom, and these Proverbs were used as instruction to train them to be loyal, faithful, dedicated workers for the king. So there's some good insights in these chapters, 27 at the end, then 28 and 29, into what the life of a leader ought to be. And one of the things they talk about is modeling. Now, a woman named Jennifer Green wrote a chapter called Raising or Rising Up After the Women of Strength. That's in a book called Preaching Character. And she says the process of becoming virtuous is not completely rational or conscious. To become a person of integrity, it's not always a matter of just thinking, but there's an emotional component to that as well. Virtue can be developed in emotional and aesthetic responses to the world and people in our lives. She said there's a strong emotional component to becoming a person of integrity as well. Now, she did an experiment, or she refers to an experiment. Psychologists showed 3 videos to 3 different groups. One video was of a boy giving food and blankets to a homeless person in Philadelphia. So here's a video of a guy, he's actually giving it to several people, goes around Philadelphia giving away needy items like food and clothing to the homeless. The second video was of a nature documentary where they just went out and they showed videos of the country and the trees and the mountains, and it's very beautiful. But it's a nature documentary. And the third one was a comedy routine. Laughter, jokes. After watching the videos, the groups were brought in contact with a needy person. This is all structured. 3 groups watched 3 different videos. After it was over, they were all brought together into the presence of a needy person. The people who watched the video of the person helping the poor were more likely to help the person they came in contact with that was needy. They had just seen a video of someone helping the poor that touched something deep within them. When they came in contact with someone who was poor, they were more prone to help that person than the others who watched a nature video and a comedy video. Now, Jennifer Green calls that desire to emulate elevation. Elevation. The desire to emulate someone great is emulation. And she said it's like an athlete. Athletes inspire. They not only provide the example for other athletes to, work a little harder, they provide the emotional incentive as well. Because you can get in the mind of that athlete and see how that athlete performs in basketball or football or baseball. That's what I want to do, and you work harder to emulate. Elevation is the emotion inspired in us to do something good and virtuous. Elevation brings a desire to become the best version of ourselves that we can be. So on the one hand, you have admiration, which is important, but emulation is the desire and the drive to become like. And that was brought about with this video of helping someone that's homeless. Now, here's the importance of that for leaders. Leaders who model a life of integrity inspire others to follow their steps. And it's not just what you teach, it's what you model and what you see in their life. So that if you are, let's say at your church, you are, you want to mentor someone that's, say, in high school. So you take this young boy or this young girl and you go to Sonic after Wednesday night, or you just do something when you're out, you're just talking, you ask, what's life like at school? When's your next game? Maybe I can go to your game. And the student's most likely going to like that. Now what you can do is take that a step further, and you can talk to this teenager, this high school student, and say, I really enjoy visiting with you here, but there's a young boy I would suggest men do boys, women do girls. If you're a man, you've got this teenage boy, and you might say to him, if you notice Johnny in the 6th grade, he's really been looking alone lately. Have you noticed that? He's not talking as much, he's not participating, and I understand his parents, are just separated. What do you say the next time we go out, we take him? So what you're doing is, you're modeling the teenager, but now you're not just modeling him to, follow your example and become more like you just through, intellectual means. You're now adding this component of actually training him how to model by bringing the 6th grader along. He doesn't even know that's what you're doing. But now you talk to him, what can we do with him? We'll take him to Sonic next week, and he'll probably say something like, we can find out what sport he likes, and maybe we'll go to one of his games. And what you've done is you've raised this whole thing to another level. This young man now takes a liking to the 6th grader. There's an emotional component to this, and he's becoming more like you in ways that he can even imagine. You're modeling what this life is like, but beyond modeling, you're actually engaging him in it now. You're now mentoring 2 people, but one of them you're mentoring more indirectly as you do it through this older teenager, you see? And you're inspiring in a way beyond just the rational. You're bringing in an emotional component here, and you're creating a friendship and a relationship between these 2 younger people. Why can't high school students mentor middle school students? Why do we think we have to wait until we're older before we can start mentoring? We have some very, very good, outstanding high school students here, don't we? Yeah. You may not realize this. You may have forgotten when you were in 6th grade. But how did you feel toward the seniors in high school and the juniors and sophomores? You looked up to them and went, wow. You may not remember that, but you did. Pretty much we all did. You might have gone home and said some of them are not very nice, but you still but they are bigger. Wow. And when you are in 5th grade or 4th grade, even 6th grade, and you go watch a Babe Ruth game, even though they're just a few years older than you, it seems like that game is at such a higher level, and you just stand there and go, I can't imagine standing at the plate with somebody pitching that fast. And then guess what? 3 years later, you're at that plate, and maybe you're even the pitcher, throwing that fast. But in sixth grade, you look at them and you go, wow. You've got sixth graders looking at you doing that. So when you just stop and say, hey, how's your last game go? When's your next game? Well, maybe I can come see it. You know what they're going to do? They're going to run home and say, Mom, guess what? You have created a moment. You have created an opportunity with them to touch them in a deep way. We talked about that yesterday. When you show interest in them and you ask them, and then when you're involved now in this kind of a 3-tier mentoring relationship, and you invite them to go to Sonic with you, and you're going to have a drink together and talk about the game or whatever, you just created something very powerful. And one of the things we want to do, I talked yesterday about the moment. We had a very popular football coach in our town die 2 weeks ago, 47, of a heart attack. He, very successful coach, has done a very good job. He has a 16-year-old boy who played on the freshman team last year, but he was going to get to play some for his dad this year. 16 years old. And his dad dies just before the start of the football season. So at the funeral, he was just really, he was lost. He posted on Twitter just before the funeral that the best coach I've ever known and the best man I've ever known gave this advice, and it was a saying from his dad. The best man I've ever known and the best coach I've ever known, and it was his dad. They took the body in the casket. The funeral service was held in the gym, which was very appropriate. He was athletic director, football coach. Family very extremely athletic. His daughter played in the state volleyball championship this year. Just very appropriate to have it in the gym. They carried the body, the pallbearers, and the entire football team out of the gym, across the street, out into the football field, and nobody knew what they were doing. This was totally unrehearsed. I didn't even know if his widow knew it. But the son was in on it. And he walks out there with them, and they set him down at the 50-yard line, and they have a prayer. Then they walk him across the end zone. And he spent the last 20 years driving across the end zone with his team, right? They walk him across the end zone. Then they carry him off the field and put him in the hearse. And then the 16-year-old son leads a cheer. And I don't remember what the cheer was. I just remember standing there. And he summons up all the bravado that he can. And you can see it in his face. He summons up all the bravado to lead this cheer and to lead it with confidence and courage. But when it's over, you can just see this sinking feeling come over him. I led this cheer of my dad's that my dad's never, ever going to get to call for again or hear us. So he stands there with this lost look on his face. The team's around him. They pat him on the shoulders. They start to walk off. This 18-year-old, who's a senior, he's like 6'9". He's an outstanding football player and basketball player. He comes up to the 16-year-old, because he's played for this boy's dad for his whole high school career. And he just grabs him on the shoulder, and he gives his shoulder a squeeze and shakes his shoulder. And the 16-year-old turns around and looks way up at him. And the 18-year-old is crying. Tears in his eyes. And the boy looks up at him. And the 18-year-old just nods his head at him. The 16-year-old nods back. Then they separate and they walk off. You know, you've heard men don't have to say anything. They can just the look. Women may have that as well between them. But you've heard, boy, guys, you guys don't have to say anything. You can just communicate so much. Well, they did. And that 18-year-old told that 16-year-old, I'm here for you. I'm here for you. I'm yours. You call me anytime. You're my brother. And when the team walked off, I called the boy's number. I forgot his name. I've known him for years. He's a funny kid. He tried to charge me for public parking one time. He's in Boy Scouts, and he's leading us into this community dinner we have, and he said, this is $5 for your car. But I pulled him aside. I said, number 10, come here. I said, I saw what you did. And I don't know if I should have called his attention to it, because sometimes when you do those things, it's not for anybody else to see, but I saw it. And I said, I saw what you did. And I said, do you know what you did? I said, you created a moment for that boy that he will never, ever forget. You squeezed his shoulder, you looked him in the eye, and you told him, I'm your friend, I'm your brother, I'm always here for you. And he will never, ever forget this moment. Nor will you, nor will I. And thank you for doing that for him. And what I wanted to communicate to the older boy was, There are opportunities that God gives us in life to do just that. To be the person that can change the course of direction in a person's life, to take that emotional moment and give meaning to it. To give hope to it, to possibly give a new vision in that moment. And what he did in that moment was he let this boy know, you are not alone. No matter how much it might feel like it sometimes, there's going to be a bunch of us guys here for you always. Out of loyalty for your father, we will be your older brother. That's modeling. See, that is going beyond admiration, where the 16-year-old admired the 18-year-old, to emulating, to elevating. Now I want to be like this older guy. Someday I will have the chance. I will encourage a younger person when it looks like life's about over. That's a leader with integrity, who gives of himself to help others and inspire others to follow in his steps. Let's talk a little more about the importance of integrity. Leaders with integrity are essential to lead others in integrity, because we don't just step into integrity accidentally, right? Nobody chooses accidentally when they're 18 months old to start eating more neatly, to use a napkin instead of their sleeve, right? That doesn't just happen by accident. It takes people who are more mature to lead us with intent out of the baby behavior into adult behavior. I don't know anybody that at age 18 months just said, I'm getting tired of these diapers. Mom, I'm ready for the next step. Let's do it. No, forget the popsicles and the lollipops and all those other incentives. I want to grow up now. That doesn't just happen by accident, does it? It takes people with integrity to lead people into integrity and to promote health in the home. Integrity is important for leaders because integrity guides their steps and saves them from the moral traps that can destroy them. If you are going to be a leader, one reason that you have to have integrity is because it will help you save your own life. Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 5. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. The righteousness of the blameless, verse 5, makes a straight way for them, but the wicked are brought down by their own wickedness. And again in verse 6, the righteousness of the upright delivers them, but the unfaithful are trapped by their evil desires. Was Judas a leader with integrity? He was given the purse strings. He was given the money bag. And what did he do with it? He stole from it. And his greed became very evident when he was willing to sell the life of Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. Judas somehow worked himself into a position of leadership that he did not have the character to maintain, because he used his position to take money from the rest of the group or whoever donated to the cause of Jesus' work, and he even sold Jesus into his crucifixion, if you will, for 30 pieces of silver. That's what Proverbs is talking about. The integrity of the upright delivers them. Had he been a person of integrity, he never would have stolen from the purse. And if he hadn't been that greedy to steal from the purse, it's very possible he would not have traded the life of Jesus for some gold coins or silver coins. So, integrity is important because it saves us. It's also important for the entire community because the leader's godly character has a positive impact on the entire community. Chapter 11 and verse 14. For lack of guidance, a nation falls, but many advisors make victory sure. And back up in verse 10. When the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. When the wicked perish, there are shouts of joy. When the righteous prosper, the city rejoices because it becomes a safe place again. It becomes a safe place to do business. It becomes a safe place for your children to walk the sidewalks. One of the things I like about small towns, it's still relatively safe to let your children go out and play in the front yard, right? But if you live in a big city, are you prone to let your children just be unsupervised in the front yard or running around the neighborhood? Most likely not. So when the righteous thrive and they take over the city, everyone except the wicked rejoice. And when the wicked are driven out, the righteous can rejoice. So that kind of life is important, the life of integrity. On August 27, 1996, 3 weeks before his death, Andre Nouwen, who's a Catholic priest, wrote in his journal, "We who offer spiritual leadership often find ourselves not living what we are preaching or teaching." Did you catch that? I told you I'd have a quote toward the end of the lesson about this again, similar to one at the beginning. We who offer spiritual leadership often find ourselves not living what we are preaching or teaching. It is not easy to avoid hypocrisy completely because we find ourselves saying things larger than ourselves. I can mention to you what the principles of parenting are, but I've got to be honest and say I haven't always kept them. Haven't always known how to. Haven't always known all the details in a situation. It takes a little while to learn that this child that is just so sweet and innocent has already learned how to play mom and dad against each other, right? They learn which parent they can shed a tear for, and that soft-hearted parent will say, of course you can have some ice cream, honey, not realizing they've already had 2 bowls, right? Okay, so there are principles that you fail at. There are principles you don't know yet. But you do the best you can. And even when you read all the books on parenting, you've got all the best principles. Now you can teach the class. Guess what? We are still human. And we can teach principles, but because we are human, we will fail at some of them. And you know what Andre Nouwen does? It is so freeing. He says it for all of us that are leaders. We fail. We mess up. We know what to do, but we simply can't do it. We can teach oftentimes far better than we can perform because we teach things larger than ourselves. I often call people to a life I'm not fully able to live myself. I am learning that the best cure for hypocrisy is community. Hypocrisy is not so much the result of not living what I preach, but more of not confessing my inability to fully live up to my own words. And what he says, the good thing about a healthy community is that there's enough love here and enough acceptance and enough realization that we are all flawed people. I can say, I'm sorry I lost my cool on the basketball court this afternoon, and I kind of let my bad side show. I'm very competitive. I apologize for that. And I hope that won't interfere with the rest of the lessons I teach this week. If it does, I understand, but I hope it won't. Please forgive me. And let's try to go on. Okay? He says a healthy community gives you room to do that. The other thing we can do is just pretend, I wouldn't have lost my cool if you wasn't so bad out there. You ought to be the one up here apologizing, not me. I only threw the football or the basketball in your face because you got in my way like you were the whole game. You don't come to Bible camp and play that competitively. What is wrong with you? Are you stupid? You do something like that. Is that going to convince you that I really did the right thing out there in the court throwing the basketball at you? No. Try to explain that away or justify it, cover it up. But if I just come out and say, man, I blew it. I am sorry. You may still be upset with your broken nose and the bloody nose. But you see the difference? And what Nouwen says, for those of us that are spiritual leaders, let's admit our mistakes and not try to cover them up. Now, for those of us who are parents and we have made a mistake, and I don't mean just giving the 3rd bowl of ice cream because we didn't know about the first 2. But when we've done something, let's say that we have been too, we've given into our children too many times and too much through the years. It's become a pattern that we don't stay strong, and when they plead, we give in. And then they learn how to manipulate and coerce. And now they're 18 years old and they're going off to college. And life's a little harder for them because they've not yet learned how to carry their own weight. They're always manipulating. They're always trying to get somebody to carry their weight for them. And now they're going off to college and they're really, they're unprepared for life in a dorm. And it's going to be tough for them. And now the dorm mother is going to have to straighten out what you didn't. Now what do? Well, you can go to your child and try to explain that. Honey, I want to apologize to you. because I've been unfair for you for the last 16 years. Ever since you've been 2 years old and you learned how to whine, I've given in to you because I haven't wanted to upset you. And I haven't made you do your chores. I haven't made you live up to your responsibilities. I haven't made you live up to when you failed. And now you're leaving home. And frankly, this is one area where you're not ready. You're too immature in this area, and I don't know how we're going to correct this. It's somewhat out of my hands now because you're leaving home. I hope you'll have a dorm supervisor that'll hold your feet to the fire in a way that I didn't. But I just want to tell you, I am sorry, and I wish I'd done better. And then what do? You leave it at that, and you don't apologize again. You know why? You apologize one time sincerely, and if you have to cry, you cry with it. You let them see the depth of your sincerity at apologizing and the mistakes you've made. But if you keep bringing that up and repeating that over and over and over, then what happens? Pardon? That's their crutch. And then for the rest of their lives, they can say, I got this problem because of my mother and my father. They even admit it. See? So we want to give them motivation to grow and change. We don't want to give them ammunition to use against us for the rest of their lives. So a spiritual leader may have to apologize and say, I'm sorry. I blew that one. You may have to do it in your home. You may have to do it in your church. You may have to do it in your Bible class, your small group, wherever. But then you move on and you expect them to move on as well. You keep apologizing, especially in your home with children that are still there. You enable them. You entitle them to use your mistake as an excuse for their continued misbehavior. Take that away from them by only apologizing once, meaning it, and then you grow up or grow on and expect them to grow on as well. Make sense? So now one's statement here for me as a leader, as a preacher, is very freeing because I know the areas that I do not live up to the level of what I preach. There's a certain level of behavior we preach, it's in the Bible, but I know I can't live all the way up to that. And the best way to compensate for that is just to say, boy, I blew that. I am sure sorry. Rather than to make excuses or to try to deny it and hide it. Well, how do we set this example? How do we model this life, especially at a young age? Well, 1 Timothy chapter 4 is just such a beautiful passage that tries to put into an actual kind of picture of life of what these earlier steps were that we read about modeling and integrity from Proverbs. 1 Timothy chapter 4. 1 Timothy 4, 12 through 16. Paul tells the young preacher Timothy, don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in life, in love, in faith, and in purity. Until I come, devote yourself to the public reading of Scripture, to preaching and to teaching. Do not neglect your gift which was given you through a prophetic message when the body of elders laid their hands on you. Be diligent in these matters. Give yourself wholly to them, so that everyone may see your progress. Watch your life and doctrine closely. Persevere in them, because if you do, you will save both yourself and your hearers. And this could also be save both yourself and your followers. The word is actually hearers, but the hearers are the ones who are following Timothy. And what Paul tells him is the things we're talking about here, about the importance of community and integrity and the kind of leader you need to be, you will save not just yourself, but you will save the members of the community who are following your life. There's several specific things that Timothy mentions that young preachers, and I think young people in particular, need to set an example for and in. The first is speech. Set an example for the believers in speech. And there's an awful lot in Proverbs about what speech needs to be. There also is in Paul's letters about our speech needs to be seasoned with salt. You know, we have this saying, take what they say with a grain of salt, meaning have a filter in your ears so when they speak, you know, take it with a grain of salt. It may be the truth, but you know them, it may not be. And Paul says, no, that's not where the filter needs to be. The filter needs to be in our mouths and our tongues. Have a grain of salt so that you filter your words before you say them. Are they appropriate? Are they going to encourage? Are they going to build up? Are they going to be destructive? Are you always using humor to hurt someone else? Do you use humor against others routinely to bring attention to yourselves, but leave them feeling like, why am I always the brunt of this? Think about that. Use your speech in a way that is powerful in building others up and encouraging. Secondly, he says, in conduct or in life, simply let your life be something that other people are going to be able to say, wow, look at the life that he lives. I don't know if there's any youth ministers here, but in defense of youth ministers, let me say that I think one of the hardest fields or one of the hardest ministries in a church is the youth minister. Because you think about it, a youth minister has to be young enough to appeal to the kids, but mature enough to appeal to the parents. Okay, I'm 59, I'm a preacher. Not a youth minister anymore, I'm a preacher. I do a lot of stuff with youth, still youth camp, take them, help with our youth rally, etc. But I don't have to act, none of them, if I go out there and try to act like a teenager, they're going to say, who is this old guy? If I go out there in the basketball court, though, and I just throw some from the outside and say, well, I got a kink in my back here, they'll say, give the old guy some room, let him have another shot. They'll respect it if I don't pretend I'm a teenager, right? Right? Whew, good. If you need me to be a teenager, okay, I will for half an hour, but beyond that. But a youth minister that's still young, he's got to appeal to the young people, but not so much that the parents think, are we really going to just hire another kid to be with the kids? Have you ever seen that stress? That's a tough one. That's a real tough one. When my sister goes to church, it's a much larger church in Alabama. They have, 600 or 700 people. And they let one of their youth ministers moved some years ago, and my nephew, who's now in college, was like 7 or 8 years old at the time, 9 years old. He loved this youth minister. And one of the criticisms of this youth minister was he was too immature. And they said he acted like a kid. So I'm talking to my sister one day, and she's explaining that, and I hear this 8 or 9 year old boy's voice in the background yell, "That's what this church needs, is more kids!" He wanted that youth minister. He loved him. But the parents looked at him and said, but we need somebody that lives a little above our kids to raise them to a higher level. So, I know that sometimes it's hard to evaluate a youth minister. It's even harder to be one, especially if you're a mature enough youth leader to realize the gap that you have to fill between here and here. That's why if you are in a small church and you don't have enough funds for a youth minister, we sometimes bemoan that and say, man, I wish we had 10 more families we could afford a youth minister. And I can tell you that if you hire a good youth minister, he and his wife are worth every penny that you spend on them in the way they can minister to kids. But at the same time, if you hire one that's not going to be that good for the youth ministry and for the youth, it can be a very poor use of that money. So don't necessarily wish you had 10 more so you could hire a youth minister. Use that period of time before you do grow to minister as the parents to the youth in the church. Let parents do it. Family-based youth ministry. And if you have a good youth minister, you'll notice a lot of youth ministers today don't want to just be the caretaker of your children. They want to engage and help facilitate a family-based youth ministry program in the church, where youth and parents are engaged together. We're realizing now one of the problems with so many of our teenagers when they graduate and they go off to college and they don't go to church anymore, one of the reasons is because one of the reasons is there is a gap between the young people and the older people in the church. And a guy named Dave Kinnaman, I think it's Dave, has done some surveys of youth that leave high school and go on to college and don't continue with church, and finding out why. One thing he's found is there is a lack of connectedness between young people and older people. We know who they are. They've grown up here. We've seen them for years. But how many elders have taken, or deacons or Sunday school teachers have taken a high school student out to say, hey, let's go have lunch this week, and form that kind of a close, personal, connected relationship with them? It turns out that that's pretty critical to the ongoing faith practice of that young person. That 7 adults at my church routinely through my high school years took me out for lunch and asked me how I was doing. That has a massive impact, it turns out. So, a youth minister who realizes that, He's going to try to kind of facilitate that kind of interaction between the young and the old. And guess what? If you don't have a youth minister at your church, you can still be the parent that does that. I know in our congregation in Ulysses, for all three of our kids, when we had a youth minister and when we didn't, for all three of them, I called somebody in the church and said, my son or my daughter, number one, or daughter number two, is having a struggle right now. Would you please take them out for lunch? And I think I've always offered to pay for it, and they've never taken it. They've always said, yes, we'll take him or her out. We'll have a talk. We'll visit. Sometime it became a rather lengthy mentoring thing where they saw them for many times over many years, and even maintained contact after they left. Sometimes it was just for a short-term thing. One time it was a high school girl. I said, would you take my daughter out to Sonic, drive around town and visit? I will pay for the Sonic drinks and snacks. I just need her to know that there's an older kid in the church that's looking out for her and cares for her. She says, I would love to do it, and I will not take your money. And she did it. And it helped this daughter through whatever that particular 6th grade crisis was at the time. All three of my kids, though, I've asked men for my son and women and teenage girls for my daughters. That I was never turned down. They always did it. I recruited the mentors that I needed for my kids right from our local church in Ulysses. And you can do that in your church right there. And whether those men or ladies realized it, they were being recruited because of their integrity to provide leadership for the community. And it's helped all three of my kids, which has helped my wife and me immensely for peace of mind. And you can do that in your church. Become proactive. Think of yourself as the mentor-mentee pairing off person in your church. Notice a teenage girl that needs some attention, go find a lady at your church to connect with her and take her out. Do the same with a boy. That is leadership, and you don't have to have a title to do that. Number 3, Paul tells Timothy to practice love, and love is what you give of yourself for others. Practice your faith. Let them see how you continue your relationship with God. Number 5, live your faith or live your life in purity. And there's 3 things that will come of this, he says, by the power of example. You will silence your critics, you will save yourself, and you will save others. You live a good life as a leader with integrity, admitting your mistakes when you make them, but doing the best you can. You will silence your critics, verse 12. You will save yourself, verse 16, and you will save others. That's the benefit of a life of integrity lived in the community. Any questions? Any comments or discussion? I don't know what time officially we are done, but I'm done.